Hey, good evening, fellow Toastmasters and most welcome guests. Welcome to ASML Club. Do you want to use storytelling techniques in your presentations to make them more engaging and memorable? If your answer is yes, you come to the right place. Today, we are honored to invite Nish to give a workshop telling your stories with your slides. Please let me introduce Nish briefly. Nish has been a Toastmaster for 5 years. He has represented and won district-level contests in international speech, tall tales, and humorous speech. Most recently, he won the first place in 2020 District 101 International Speech Contest. In his job as the Director of Product Management at AMD, he uses the storytelling skills to craft complex data-driven presentations and consumer-show keynotes. Now, let me hand over the stage to Nish.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you for having me. And first things first, guys, please turn on your cameras if you don't mind, because promise, I don't bite, and over the Zoom, Delta is not contagious, so we can have face-to-face. And also, I would like to keep this interactive, so I'm gonna ask you guys questions and also pause in many places to have questions so that we can have this as interactive as possible. So before we all start, just to get a theme of, what type of audience we have so that I can customize this a little bit, can you, by show of hands, tell me if you've ever attended a storytelling workshop or read a book about storytelling? I know there's some very senior Toastmasters here, but show of hands, can you guys tell me if you're exposed to storytelling techniques? All right, I see most hands go up. Now, maybe let's ask the first poll, because I think that's a little bit, that's relevant to this, and I want to loosen up this workshop with a poll. So Yifang, if you can put the first poll on. And the very first poll is to do with, we all come to Toastmasters and we learn some very, very amazing skills. So the question is, how easily or how much do you integrate all these skills in your presentations day to day? All right. See a few people clicking. Okay, I think there's about 11 people clicked. So if you guys haven't, go for it. Okay, I think it's almost a minute. I see about 12 people clicked. So if you can end the poll, Yifang. It looks like very easy and moderate. So a lot of you use techniques which you found at Toastmasters, but very specifically storytelling techniques. Do you guys find it easy to use in your day-to-day presentation? Maybe show of hands if you do, if you use storytelling techniques specifically in your day-to-day presentations at work. Okay, I see a few hands, so good, because so my journey with storytelling started all the way in 2018. 2018, I was, that ancient time when we all met face to face in a club. So I was driving to a club international speech contest. I drove in, I gave the speech, people laughed, I was so happy, and I didn't win. So I thought, maybe if I practice harder next year, I can make it. So the next year I practiced, I went to many clubs, I went and delivered the speech in 2019 in my club, and I didn't win either. I only got second. So I was frustrated. I took my speech video and I started going to different people. I was like, I need help. Let me ask, what am I doing wrong? I mean, after all, I was telling a story. People were laughing, yet I was not getting to that, not even past club. So one of my mentors looked at it and went, Nish, you're narrating, but not telling a story. You're narrating the events, what happened to you, but it is not a story. And that opened the eye to me, because both at work and at Toastmasters, what I thought was storytelling was just simply narrating some events which had happened to me. And maybe I got a laugh here and there, and that was it. So the same year, with the help of that mentor and few others, I competed in a different club. I was able to win, and that 2019, I was actually able to go all the way up to district. And with all the skills I learned the year after, I was able to win the international speech contest. But today, what I'm going to try and do is talk through some of these very quickly, ground everyone with what are the basic elements of storytelling, and then see how we can use that in our day-to-day presentations at work. So majority of the focus is going to be taking storytelling elements and then putting it into work. Sound good? All right, let me share my screen. Okay, let me know when you guys can see my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so if I move it back here, go. So very quickly today, we'll go through the elements of story. So here, this is the only bit I'm going to recap some of the storytelling techniques. The rest of it is going to be about what structure you can use in your presentation as a story structure, specifically with slides. Talk a little bit more about building the slide itself, how to make it pop, and then conclude the whole presentation. Okay, so let's kick off the second poll. This is more about the different elements of storytelling, just to get an understanding of what you guys think. So Yufang, if you can put the second poll up. So in storytelling, I'm sure a lot of you, because I saw a lot of hands go about, being in different workshops, there are different elements of storytelling. And I would love to hear what you guys think is the most important part of the story elements. Yeah, you can see a few more. There's eight of you have clicked. Yes, 11, almost there. Okay, there's 12 of you have done it, I guess. Cool. I think we can end the poll. It's almost a minute. Cool. So most of you said it's the message, and for many of the stories or many of the speeches, it's mainly when we start, especially in corporate presentation. Yes, you will need to identify what that message is and then work back. However, if you ask me what the most important element of the story, I would say there are some key elements, and if you miss one or the other part, then your story is definitely going to lose some luster. So it was not a fair question. I did ask the most important. So while message is the most important, we definitely need to pay attention to a few parts of the story elements, at least, to make sure that comes across or pops. So let me start off with the hero's journey, and then we'll double click into some of it. So just a very quick summary of the hero's journey, because I'm sure you guys have seen it. Any movie you take, any story you take, it is going to, if it is a good story, you can probably find the hero's journey or hero's arc embedded in the heart of the story. So let's take Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the world he knows, normal, day-to-day, mundane life. He starts with the ordinary world. The call to adventure comes, he gets a post from this visiting school. He goes into the visiting world, which is the special world. So you move from what is known to you into a slightly more, let's say, unknown part of the world. And then as you go through that world, you get tested. You have a lot of adversities, and eventually you overcome the adversities. And from that, you get a reward. So in this case, Harry Potter was able to know what happened to his parents, what really happened to them. And then eventually he gets confronted with a version of Voldemort, and he's able to beat Voldemort. And he returns back with the knowledge of he's a wizard, and he comes back with some learnings which he's gotten from that, which the key learning of the first book was it was love which actually protected him, and he brings that back as a bond with his friends back into this ordinary world. So a hero's journey is a circle. As you start with the ordinary world, you tap into the unknown, you go through some tribulations, then you get a reward from that, and then you bring that back. So what I wanted to show you next is a set of this in terms of what are the boxes of, okay, if we now take that and narrow it down to some of the key elements of story, what would they be? Now, according to Craig Valentine, you probably would have seen the 4 C's or the 9 C's. I like to think of it with a few little bit extra elements. And we are going to double click into this. I'm going to talk a little bit more examples. So bear with me for the first, let's say 30 seconds. First 3 minutes of this, and then we'll double click a little bit further. So first, you always start with settings. This means you need to put your audience in the place. So when I started the story in the beginning itself, I talked about, do you remember the time when we were meeting face to face? So as soon as you put people in a setting, in a scene, they already mentally start painting the picture. So this is why setting is important. All the good stories have characters, they have villains, they have heroes, they have mentors, and they have friends. So characters, you need to define your character. You need to set up what the story is about, which will be the plot. As I mentioned, mentor, who would be the guiding person to the main part of the main hero. You will come across a conflict, some twist, climax. And whenever you're writing a story, and Matthew Dix talks about this in his book, Storyworthy, 5-second element. 5-second moment. Now, normally, if you have a story, normal day-to-day stories, it's, even though we take 7-minute speeches, or in some cases, TED Talk, 17 minutes, all of that happens in a very split second. Falling in love, meeting, let's say, your love of your life, having a kid, that split moment when you see the kid's face. All of this is a very split second moment. And if you can capture that moment of transformation in your story and build from there, then that is going to give a lot more gravity to your story. So that is why I've called out the 5-second moment for that story, then obviously the conclusion and reward. So enough of me talking. I want to show my speech, the district speech from 2020. And I want to try and see if you guys can identify some of these elements in that, so we can move that into work presentations. So give me a second. Let me stop sharing. And let me, okay, open this up. All right. Share sound. All right. Can you guys see my screen again? Now? Yep. All right.
Nish Neelalojanan. The small, sweet moments. The small, sweet moments. Nish Neelalojanan.
Contest chair and anyone stuck at home in this uncertain time. Last December, I went back home to Sri Lanka. Have you ever been on a journey when everything went wrong? It all started with, this is the captain speaking, will be slightly delayed. We took off 2 hours later. For the entire journey, the baby behind me showed up its vocal variety. Finally, we landed. Guess what didn't? My luggage. By the time I got home, I was completely worn out. My dad flung the door open, gave me a bag and said, come, come, come. I have something special for you. I thought, oh, please be a glass of whiskey. He took me to the small kitchen and said, sit, 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 sit. Look what I got you. It was a small cup of chocolate ice cream right next to his glass of whiskey. I'm thinking, can we switch? He said, son, tell me all about your journey. As I picked up the ice cream, I told myself, never again am I coming back to Sri Lanka. Only Skype. I tasted the ice cream. It took me back. No, it's not what you're thinking. This ice cream had no whiskey. But have you ever tasted something which took you back to your past? This took me back to when I was 5. We were living in northern Sri Lanka. It was torn by a brutal civil war. My mom and dad made a bold decision. My mom said, son, we are going to live with your auntie in Colombo. We are leaving everything behind. I asked, you are taking me, right? She smiled. I asked, can we take the cow? She said, cow, your auntie is already in Colombo. My dad gave her the look. He said, son, we are leaving everything behind, even the cow. All we are taking is some food, clothes, and the watch Grandpa gave me. The next day, we started our trip through the rainforest, slowly and quietly. Bang, bang, bang! Gunshots, gunshots! My mom pulled me to the ground. My dad took his shirt off, yelled, we're saving ants! We're saving ants! The gunshots stopped. We slowly crawled through the rainforest and got on a train headed to Colombo. For the entire 9-hour journey, I was clung to my mother's arm. I was still shaking. Now, what I didn't know is that someone had stolen my dad's wallet in that train. To make things worse for my dad, as we got off the station, I spotted an ice cream shop. Daddy, ice cream? He said, that ice cream is not so good. I showed off my vocal variety. He said, okay, I'll be back. He came back with a cup of chocolate ice cream. As we took a scoop, we started to smile. That night, we got to our auntie's house. And I overheard my auntie talking to my dad. She said, that little brat, to buy him ice cream, you sold our dad's precious watch. My dad said, in these uncertain times, we survived a dangerous journey. At least for a moment, that ice cream melted all our worries away. These small, sweet moments make life worth living. As I came back out of that memory, back in the small kitchen, I scraped the last scoop of the ice cream. And my dad said, "Son, it's always good to see you home." My long flight, my lack of sleep, my lost luggage, all melted away. I told myself, I'll always come back to Sri Lanka. In these uncertain times, life feels like a dangerous journey with an invisible thief stealing our hope every day. The small, sweet moments you create for the ones you love can melt your worries away. What small, sweet moments will you create? These moments make life worth living. Contest chair.
Right. Thanks, guys. So in this story, did I stop sharing? Yeah. So in this story, can someone tell me what was the ordinary world and what was the special world, so to speak? Can you spot the difference? There was two different worlds which we walked through in this story. Anyone? Go ahead, then. Yeah.
Oh, Arnold, you can go if you want. Oh, were you
No, go
going to say
ahead.
something, Arnold? Okay. The ordinary world was the like when you're on the journey back home,
Mhm.
like all the usual stuff happens.
Yep.
Okay.
Ani, you were going to say something?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I would like to ask a question in general, the whole thing, over the whole thing. But I think let's go more on specific of the story of your speech. And I would like to ask them later.
Sure.
Unless you want to answer some questions. If you want to answer some questions now, I would ask another questions now.
Sure. Let me finish this bit about with the speech, and then yeah, definitely I can pause for some questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
No problem. So totally the ordinary world was where when we went to the flight, so the normal thing which everyone would know about, and the special world which people may not know about is the war area, war-torn area. So not introducing something which people don't know first and starting with the ordinary world always helps. And also putting everyone in the setting of, remember, most people would have taken a plane journey, especially in our district. So setting the setting of where when you were going to the plane journey in this particular case is what started off with the setting. So and can someone tell me in this particular case about the characters in the story? So who was the, say, main I mean, I think the obvious thing, main character, you guys figure out was me, but who was the mentor in this story?
Yeah.
Yeah, so dad was a mentor. Was there any other mentors?
Mom.
Mom, it could have been, but in this case, like mentor is someone who will guide you towards an answer, right? So I was using mom as more of a humor element in this story, a supporting character rather than mentor itself. But that particular moment of where, say, the memory itself, right? So because that is in both of those stories, but the memory itself taught me something which could also be a mentor. So what I was another thing which you guys can note is that You don't have to have a human mentor. The mentor could be a memory. The mentor could be a certain thing which happened, which you then realize from it. But having a humanized or character mentor always makes it easy for the audience to pick up. So I'm sure you picked up, I'm looking at the time, so I'm sure you picked up in terms of the conflict where the war happened. Can someone tell me what was the 5-second moment in this? What was that moment of transformation?
When your father sacrificed his watch for that sweet moment to escape the horror of the day.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone else feel there was a different 5-second moment, or did everyone feel what Lloyd said was the 5-second moment?
I felt like it was when your aunt was giving your dad a hard time for selling the watch, but he explained the reason why it didn't really matter to him because of just how you guys weren't able to have to worry at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Okay, so the beautiful thing about a 5-second moment is obviously when you write the speech, you most likely would ideally should identify that one moment. But in this case, I identified as the moment when I was in the kitchen where I realized when my dad said, "It's always good to see you." That was so emotional when I actually felt it. For me, that was the 5-second moment. That's where I transformed. However, like you guys said, when I said the story and asked for people where they thought the transformation happened, it was often the moment where the dad sacrificed the watch, or in some cases about the aunt, and some people talked about the kitchen. So it's okay in some cases where, as long as you identify that moment of transformation and that is coming through, some people may emote or relate to a certain different part of the story as the transformation, but it's still, those are very powerful moments. But when it comes to a transformational thing, always pick that moment which is very emotional to you. And one thing which happened with me, especially when the story was being told in real life in the club, there were people getting, like, I got teary-eyed, and there were people who got teary-eyed in the audience as well when it was physical, because we started off in the club and then moved on. And that had never happened to me in other speeches. And a lot of it happened towards those emotional moments in that speech. So that 5-second moment then translated into people buying into that message. So again, a key part of this is having that 5-second moment as your gravitational pull towards the story and building that story towards it. Obviously, when you do the speech, you're going to have your message, but when you have a story, having that 5-second moment is very, very powerful. Now, let me translate this. So let me pause here for some questions, and I'm going to then translate this into day-to-day, say, presentation. So go ahead, Ani, you had some questions. Why don't you take some questions now and then go to the next rest. We can't hear you, Ani, sorry.
Hello, yes, sir. Ness, how do you intensify or make that 5-second moment more intense so that you grab the full attention of your listeners? They're waiting for something else, a resolution maybe after that, but make it more intense, make it more puzzling and appealing. But at the same time, it is something that you need to make it so high that it becomes a barrier wanting to be resolved very soon or instantly.
Sure. There's 3 ways you can do that, or at least 3 ways I try to do it. One is generally put the 5-second moment in just after the climax of your story. This climax is where you would have peaked your story. Just after that peak, if you can have that 5-second moment, that will help. Second thing is try to build out the speech so that you're building towards that 5-second moment. What I mean by that is you need to make sure that your 5-second moment is not right at the end. So in this speech, I think it came about 4.5 minutes. So it was not as towards the end. So it is somewhere towards the middle or slightly after the middle, not right at the end, because you want to have that weight somewhere in the middle so that you can gravitate and then put the message behind it. Last but not least, always fluctuating emotions. So if you had humor, then taking them into something very serious, and then bringing back humor, taking them into more serious. So going that up and down roller coaster, if you, in the beginning, if you saw, it was very lighthearted. Then it got a little bit serious. Then I brought it down to some level of humor, and then you brought it again down to seriousness. So you're taking the audience up and down. And if you do it a few times and then bring it to your 5-second moment, that will create more of an emotional, let's say, tension in the story as well. So those would be the 3 things. Put it out right after the climax if you can. Don't put it at the end. So try to make it somewhere in the middle, and then always fluctuate. And then after a couple of fluctuations, then you bring in the 5-second moment. That will give you the most amount of, I found that will give you the most amount of emotions.
Do you teach your listeners for a suspense at that moment, so that they could focus more of their attention to what's going on or what's the next moment to come?
Yeah,
How do you achieve suspense?
Yeah, that's what I meant by climax, right? So when normally climax is the crescendo of your story. So if you're putting it after the climax, because in my story, the climax part was that war, escaping the war. It was so dramatic. It came just after that, so that you're actually, and this is also why because I had a couple of moments after that climax, that is why many people said there were different 5-second moments. If I would have put that one very powerful moment right after the climax, then it would have added even more intensity, right? That was one of the things. If I'm doing this again, I will try to tweak the speech, is not to have more emotional moments after that climax, but directly try to bring this more closer to that.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Cool. All right, let me keep going. The lighter time, I will definitely pause more again. So, was there a question? Okay, let me just switch. All right, so if I go back to my screen. So now let's take the same thing, but what I try to do is superimpose this onto a, before we go into that. So when you do your stories, generally Toastmaster stories, you are the hero, or you talk about a hero. It's super easy when you identify. If you're doing a work presentation, who is the hero, or who should be the hero? Should it be you who's telling? Go ahead. Any volunteers on who should be the hero in your work presentation? Because you could be talking about data, you could be talking about a product, you could be talking about multiple different things. In that, who should be the hero of that story when you're doing a work presentation?
Well, it could be you, although you are at the same time the narrator, or another character, and you are the narrator, the protagonist, whoever that be.
Cool. In fact, a lot of the time, and a lot of you, if you've done engineering presentation, and let's say you've gone and tried to present an emulation data, it's very hard to find the hero. Generally, your rule of thumb should be, if you can try and make the audience the hero of the story, so the problems you're trying to explain would be the audience in mind, then it starts to make it a lot more relatable, and it starts to put you in the ground of mind of how do you craft the story. So whenever I do work presentations, it's either the audience or in some cases, very seldom cases, it would be the product or very specific tool I'm trying to talk about would be the hero. But most of the time, it is the audience themselves. And we as the presenter take the role of the mentor, because you're the one who's going to give the knowledge. So whenever you're putting a presentation and you're thinking about characters, always think, okay, I'm going to tell this story, but audience is the hero. So how can I structure this story? And let's look at these story elements superimposed onto a work presentation. And the one I found, and this is, you can go back and look at it, so I will share these slides as well. I took the keynote of the first iPhone release, Steve Jobs, and I tried to superimpose some of these elements on how Steve Jobs used storytelling techniques in his very corporate keynote, which he did, and it was about the iPhone itself. So step one, we talked about the characters, settings, and plot. So in the very beginning of that presentation itself, he sets up the setting. You have all the music device, you make calls today, you can browse the internet, and he starts off with, okay, I'm going to introduce 3 different devices. That's how he starts off it. And then he introduces the characters in a story. The MedQ, the EC6, all these different smartphones, which are harder to use, the villains of his story, he introduces them. And then after that, he comes and says, okay, these are all very hard to use. These are not as smart, but today we are going to talk about the iPhone, and he introduces his main character. So in this presentation, he actually starts off the story by showing iPhone as the hero, but then transitions to that being a tool and the audience being the hero in this presentation itself. But he's clearly doing the setting. So he's clearly setting up, okay, so that the audience can step into that scene of what their day-to-day life is. He's clearly talking about the problem statement so that the audience can feel what the problems is. And he's identifying some of these other products as villains so that throughout the presentation, he can go back and forth and create his narrative. Okay. Then he moves to the next part, which is the conflict. And the conflict, or the real problem he's telling the people are going to have, is the keyboards, the plastic keyboards on the phones. And then he talks about the stylus. Okay, maybe we created a bigger screen, but you have the stylus. So he has a little bit of twist and tips in terms of as he introduces the conflict. And then Apple, as the mentor, came up with this new solution of multi-touch. And he talks about the finger itself. So that, again, going through and identifying different elements, and he's very subtly superimposing actual data-based work presentation onto the story way of, hey, I've identified the villains, which are the other phones. Now he's increasing the conflicts to the users itself, because they are actually going through those problems of, not being able to change depending on the application, what the keyboard and mouse does, stylus being lost and all of that, to the main theme of, hey, we've introduced multi-touch with this phone. Now, the climax comes when he does the demo and when he actually slides open the phone. If you look at the keynote, people gasp. They go, wow. You can physically hear people say, wow. And that was his 5-second moment. And this, different people do it differently. Another thing you can Google is Bill Gates and mosquitoes. Just Google it. He did a TED Talk. He actually brought a bottle filled with mosquitoes. And when he talked about third world country problem and malaria, and at one point, he didn't initially talk anything about it. He reveals the bottle and he opens the bottle and say, the mosquitoes are now in this audience. And people visibly get a little bit uncomfortable. That was the 5-second moment in his presentation. Now I totally understand creating some dramatic moments like this is going to be very difficult in your work presentation, but we will see some ways later on how you can add some 5-second moments into your stories or into your actual pitch itself to enhance what you're going to deliver to the audience, because anything you tell after this 5-second moment is going to stick, because this is when you're winning the audience. Once he slid open the phone and people went, wow, he completely had the audience. And this happened, I think, in his 17-minute keynote. This happened somewhere along 9 minutes. He didn't wait right till the end. He had this 5-second moment somewhere around 9 minutes of that keynote. Okay, now, and then the conclusion and reward, of course, he concludes that you can do all these wonderful things as the the hero of the story, who the audience, by now he's made it all about the audience, what they can get out of this form. And he says the reward is you're going to give all of these different things which you can do instead of having multiple devices at the same price. You're going to be able to go buy this one device. And that kind of is the reward part of it, where he's saying, okay, now that you've listened through all of this, we are giving it to you. It's going to come with AT&T, and that is the reward he gives. And then also there is a slide thing which he concludes and finishes with is, hey, now that we are introducing beyond computers, he dropped the Apple computer name from the Apple Computers Inc. name, and he made it Apple Inc. That was the final announcement he made. And that was kind of, okay, now that I've introduced everything from based on all of this, this is the change we are doing. So that was the key takeaway out of that for him as telling the story. So all of these little elements of storytelling was woven in to this corporate presentation on how the iPhone was introduced. I'll thoroughly recommend you, now that you've listened to this, just go through and listen to the whole presentation, and you will be able to peel out some of those moments. Okay, let me go to the next bit, but before I go to the next bit, is there any questions which maybe I can take one more question very quickly?
But the elements of his story, not the elements of his storytelling, but in your presentation, you added one element, which is gesture. I think 60% of your presentation and your speech are all gestures. The schema of a story is, about setting, character, plot, resolution, and of course, the ending. But in storytelling, you don't have those. One element that makes storytelling is the gesture, the theater, the performance. You did not mention that though.
So when it comes to corporate storytelling, a lot of the time, yes, the theatrical element comes, but day to day, when we do these presentations over Zoom, there is a different way you can add those theatrics without actually, yes, you have the video, but videos are right at the end, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about that right towards the end. But yes, there is other ways to create, let's say, just the same drama, same emphasis you would do by using gestures or in a real life storytelling with your slide deck itself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, let me go through this, and this bar is actually hiding what I had. So story structure of your presentation, I call this the past structure. How do you structure your presentation? How do you take all of this and make it very actionable when you create your slides? I call this the past technique, and here is why. So if you look at the hero's journey, the first part of the hero's journey is actually identifying, if you take any of your work presentation, it's all about identifying the problem statement. And this is what Steve Jobs did in his presentation as well. He first told the audience what the current state was, and he made sure that he was highlighting what problems they were going through. So whenever you're taking and you're talking about an emulation result, first, you need to make sure that everyone there is grounded about the problem. And ideally, this is a problem these audience members are facing. So if it's a group of people who's trying to, let's say, tape out a chip, which you're talking about, or if you're trying to get through a feature in a software which you're talking about, first talk about what problems that has caused by not fixing it. And then you could talk about the approach you took along the way to fix that particular problem. This is, think of it as now you're introducing some of your world. You talk to everyone, because most of the time, the people around you, the ordinary world for them is that current problem. So introducing that is pinpointing the current ordinary world. Then pull them into your world by telling the approach you took to try to solve that problem. Next part is obviously introducing your solution itself. And then last but not least, how did you apply that and what was the results of using that solution? What did you solve? What is it, the current state? How has it made it better? And so the application of it. This is why I call this the past, problem, P, approach, solution, and the spread or application, past. So an easy way for you to remember is whenever you're putting together a slide, always think, or putting together a presentation, if you can summarize this into a problem statement, the approach you took, what was the solution, and how did that apply, that automatically puts you in the mindset of creating the story. Now, on top of that, if you're approaching this with the hero itself is the audience and you are the mentor, then it gives you a mental structure on how you're going to iterate or how you're going to say this story, this particular pitch to your audience as a story rather than just presenting some data which they may not relate to. Okay, let's take a very quick example of the inconvenient truth. So if you got, I'm sure many of you have seen this. This is the Al Gore video, the very first one, the inconvenient truth. And this basically follows a similar principle. First, it talks about the problem statement. So the story is told with what is happening currently. They pull in the audience into the setting. So they build out the setting. They talk about the problem. Then they talk about, and so the first 3 bits is all talking about the problem itself. Then the causes starts to go into the approach of how you're actually trying to think about this problem. What are the things which we potentially should be thinking about? And then they go into the solution itself. And right at the end, they paint this glimmer of hope of, if you implement this, here is what it could be. So that is a very simple way of thinking about the past model in action in a documentary. Again, a very factual documentary, which is being built with that past model. And I mean, as you guys know, that won many awards, including an Emmy Award for that documentary itself. Last but not least, I'm going to take more questions after this. Basically, is taking the very famous speech, I Have a Dream, and try to superimpose this. And Nancy Duarte, and I'll talk about some of the books later on in this presentation as well. Nancy Duarte actually took Steve Jobs' that keynote, which I showed you and talked about, and I Have a Dream speech, and overlaid the structure they used. So basically, the problem statement, and then explaining the solution, then bringing back problem, explaining the solution. So using that past, as in your problem statement, approach, solution, spread, problem statement, approach, solution, spread, it goes in that circle of those past and it goes back and forth. Martin Luther King did that. And if you look at the Steve Jobs keynote, he's actually doing that circle a few times. He starts off nicely, he introduces the phone, then he goes through the circle for a few features which he talks about. he goes through that circle. So you can apply the same thing. It does not have to be the entire speech, doesn't need to be a one whole pass. You can do that circle for multiple points you need to make. Okay, let's put on the poll and then I'll take a couple of questions. So Yufang, if you can put the third poll. Right, so what is the, 1 second, yep. What is the most important part of the slide? Okay, key message. Great, I think we're, yep, almost 80% of you voted. Okay, let's close the poll as we go through this. So key message itself, and in this case, absolutely, yes, key message is the important part of the slide. However, a lot of the time, if you look at some of the presentations at work, that key message in that slide is missing. And I'll show you in a second what I mean by this, and you can also judge for yourself. So this is a typical slide. It's a very busy slide. You'll have a very overconfident statement as a type. You'll see a very overconfident statement as a heading here. So saying, okay, solving world hunger, a couple of tables or charts there, and then a whole bunch of text, and that's information gets lost. So with the pass model, if you can try and restructure the slide, if you can write the problem you're introducing in that particular slide as your title. So elements of storytelling, or it's a okay title. More importantly, it could have been how to use elements of storytelling. Could have been a little bit more, you're trying to introduce the problem statement with your title itself. Now, the next bit is you want to be able to talk about the approach. A lot of the time, this would mean putting some level of data in that slide. It could be bullet points, it could be a chart, it could be different graphs. One thing to make sure is that in that information, just make sure the most important part of that information, which you are going to come to, already pops in the slide. So it could be a big chart, but if you need to point out the middle bar of it, then make sure the other parts are grayed out so that that middle part pops out really well. And then you can actually talk about how or what that data is telling to people, or how you approached to the solution using all this data analysis you've done. And then, of course, it's hidden by this bar here, but that is where the key message or key takeaway of that slide would go. So, and you guys can tell me how many slides you've seen where the key message or key takeaway of that slide sometimes is even missing from the slide. So right at the end, make sure, especially if it's a data-driven presentation, that you're concluding and having the most important takeaway called out in the slide, so that if people miss everything, they can at least read that last bit and walk away with, okay, this is what you were trying to say. So this is a very simple, easy way to take that pass framework and put it in a slide format. You start with your problem statement, make sure whatever data you're putting, you are highlighting that one most important thing, the focus is there, and then you finish off with a key message right at the bottom. Okay, let me pause there for questions. You guys can see my slides, right? Yeah, okay, perfect. Just making sure. So let me stop sharing. Is there any questions so far?
Well, you mentioned four elements in your story about the PASS, right? PASS. What is the false S in the slide?
So spread or application. Generally, when you go through this circle, you will actually stop with PAS, right? Problem, approach, and solution. And when you come right at the end, I would recommend having that spread or application, because if you're doing a presentation, generally that last bit on what you took out of it or what that final part of conclusion is going to be right at the end. So in that Steve Jobs keynote, that S or application takeaway was Apple dropping Apple computers and becoming Apple Inc. That one more thing, or the last element which you're going to talk about as your takeaway from all of this. So that I would keep it right at the end, not actually in the slide itself, because this is a just format for the slide. So PAS, and then the last S would be your conclusion.
It will be on a separate slide, I mean.
Yeah, it'll be the last, your conclusion slide.
Okay.
Great
Go ahead.
statement of the problem. There is a writer who said that start everything with a conflict, with a tension, with a problem to create a drama for the next moment of the story or the speech. And the title is the right medium to start to spell out the problem. And how do you reconcile that with foreshadowing?
So again, I've oversimplified this here. Sure, you can have a precursor. So like when I started this presentation, before even going into the slide deck, talked about a story and then moved into the slide deck. So if you wanted some foreshadowing, some let's say pre-prepping, you can do that way. But yes, in my opinion, especially with you only get 10-15 minutes of slide time when you go present in front of execs, trying to get to your problem of what particular problem you're trying to answer in that slide would be a title, would be an ideal place to have that, because in a very concise way, you're actually trying to get the problem across, because you have maybe 5 to 7 words there, which you can put there at best. So that is why I believe title would be the right place for you to introduce whatever the problem that you're going to talk about in that particular slide.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a writer, James Patterson, you must have known him, a well-known writer. He got a formula. He said his formula begins with the putting of 2 characters on the stage, and then give them the problem to solve it, and then let them solve the problem until it is resolved. That's a good formula of a story from A to B, starting with character and the barrier in the problem and so forth.
Yeah, yes, totally. And as I said, right, your audience is your main character, you're the mentor. So if you already start with your audience, now you're giving the audience a problem with your slide. So audience are the ones you need to make sure you are having a center of your story as the main character. And the problem statement is basically how they're going to face or what problems they're facing at that particular point in time. So that's how I would see a corporate presentation, because the more you think of the audience as the main character in a corporate presentation, the more the actual presentation itself gets crafted towards them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Cool. All right, let me keep going. I will back to the slide share itself. Okay, so I think let's do the last poll very quickly. How do we make it pop? I think this was Ani's previous question. So what do you use most to make something pop out on your slide? Okay, I I see 9 votes. Cool. Okay, since you're running out of time, let's close the poll. Contrast was by far the most voted out of it, and the actual answer is, I mean, you can use all of them, and in fact, this was Harvard Business School ran a poll in terms of I think they ran it across the top Fortune, out of the Fortune 500, 100 companies. They took and ran the poll in their C-suite executives, and this is what they got as the answer of what were the things which helped elements pop out from your slide, or what made it pop. So in terms of, now that you don't have gestures, what else can you use just with the slide deck itself to make things pop? Size was rated number 1. The next one was shapes, then shade, color, and the proximity, as in moving things around. But all of these are very effective tools to make sure that you are highlighting that key part of whatever the data, whatever the, let's say, amount of text you're putting in. Make sure you're reducing the text, but also if you do have 3 or 4 bullets and there is something key important which you're trying to highlight, use one of this to accent out that. Or if you have a graph which you have with multiple data, a pie chart, and there's a key slice you want to highlight, make sure you're using one of this to highlight that, because that will help you tell the approach part of that formula very, very effectively. Okay. And so in actually, I can take a few more questions. If you guys have questions, let me switch to that, and then I will conclude the presentation. So most of my content is done. I have like 2 more minutes of stuff to go through. So let me pause there. Is there any more questions? Anyone else in general you guys have about the presentation, or in general?
How long is your conclusion then?
2 minutes.
Otherwise, okay, let me ask some of my questions now.
Sure.
When you talk of stories, are you referring to anecdotes, episode, vignettes, parables, or incidents? That's question number 1. Question number 2, how many lines of dialogue do you need to advance the story? Question number 2. Number 3, and the resolution of a conflict, would you leave it to the audience, or you do it yourself, literally?
Okay, let's go one by one. Let me test my memory. So is a story an anecdote or parable or multiple things? I think it kind of depends, because as I said, a lot of the time real life stories which happen to us happens in seconds. That second, the few second moments which happen to us is the most impactful stories. I'm sure you guys would agree. Whether you're meeting a mentor, whether you're getting a key piece of advice, that is very, very, let's say, a short amount of period. And then you build that story around that. So you can say an anecdote, you can take that anecdote, could have been a moment which you had and you use it as an anecdote, or you can build a story around that particular anecdote itself. So I would say it depends, and you can formulate a story around an anecdote or a parable or an incident. It'll be up to you what impacted, what transformed you the most, and from that transformation point it starts. What was your second question, Nani? Sorry.
Dialogue. How many lines of dialogue do you need to advance the story?
However little as, I would, in my theory is, however little you need to advance the story, you use that amount of dialogue. The reason why I say this is sometimes dialogue can get overused, and I've overused dialogue in many places, especially when you're doing a speech, and especially when you're doing a work presentation, I at least didn't find dialogue as a very effective technique in work presentations. So work presentations, keynotes, if you are having dialogues, you invite someone over and actually have with a conversation with a guest speaker rather than actually you acting out itself. And I know we do a lot of act outs in Toastmasters. In work presentation, I would say that would be a less effective technique because that will add too much drama to whatever you're trying to say. And
the third one is, do you as speaker or a storyteller resolve the conflict for them, or you could leave it to them also as a challenge?
Again, from a work perspective, you want to concretely give them the solution, right? You would have come 90% of the time. I mean, the answer is actually depends, but 90% of the time, we are there to present about a project we worked on, a solution we found, a new feature we are going to talk about. So 90% of the time, it is going to be a solution you want them to walk away with. So I would say you actually leave them with a solution or put the idea towards that solution. But it clearly depends on if it's a persuasive speech and you want to leave it with the audience and you're high level calling out and let them conclude. That is a very fair technique too. Okay.
Thank you, sir. You are a genius. Thank you so much.
Don't think so, but thank you. Oh, I see another question. How do you use humor in your work presentation? It's always misdirection gives you humor. And so in the beginning of generally starting off in something related to your presentation, but reminding them of something and misdirecting. Like when I started this, I came in front and went, remember those days we used to meet face to face? That was something which is related to what I was going to talk a little bit, but it triggered a memory, and I did see a few of you laugh during that. That's a very subtle way of bringing in humor, but I would say misdirect, triggering a memory which you know which will get laughter, and then obviously exaggerate something. Those would be the three easy ways you can add humor. I know it's very generic, but if I came here and went, guess what? And I am exaggerating something and pulling you in, it's not only let's say surprises you, so it's a little bit of a misdirect or surprising you, it will get humor from the audience. So exaggeration, misdirection, or triggering something you know which will cause at least a giggle in the audience. Any other questions before I conclude? Okay. What is the key difference of storytelling techniques when you're presenting to executives versus others? So one thing I normally do is do not distinguish between executives and others, because then you start building good habits all the time. Executives don't have a lot of time, so you try to narrow everything down, which means you need to make it as small as possible, but also think many of the people don't have time as well, right? So in work, if you're given 10 minutes and you can do it in 5, a lot of people will appreciate you. Execs will appreciate you even more. And I would say practice that across the board is what I would say. And in one more thing I found is some of these humor techniques, right? So one other thing in terms of misdirects, there was a product launch and a press article, and I was doing a summary of those press articles. And instead of saying what was good and what was bad, I put some smileys at the top going, for good and meh for meh, and thumbs down, a smiley face for all the negative articles. That was something I used in all levels, when it went, and it got some humor, but it also shows the playful side to your executive. So keeping it same, but keeping it concise, and pass works for me all the time, both for execs and non-execs. All right. But if you're presenting some data that does not have clear conclusion at the time, well, if you don't have a clear conclusion, you have a problem statement, and you will still have an approach. So you would have gotten your P and A. Now, a lot of the time, especially at work, if you don't have a solution, then you're going to either say, we're going to work and we're going to come back with a solution, or you're going to have a takeaway of that, right? So I would use that takeaway, whatever that takeaway you want to be, instead of the solution, because you actually don't have a solution, but you're going to say whatever the takeaway. I'm going to come back in 2 weeks and tell you this. We face this problem. I need your help to go solve this. Whatever that takeaway is, that would be replacing that solution. Okay. Any other questions?
Should the story be fictional or real life story? And where do you get those dramatic openings? Mosquitoes, lighting a cigarette, diving on the floor, or something, playing harmonica or something like that. Where do you get all of those, and how relevant and how resonant are they?
So, first of all, fictional versus non-fictional. I at least try to keep it non-fiction at work so that I don't get fired. But I am sure there are certain opportunities in work you can do fictional. In terms of dramatic, it doesn't have to be a mosquito. So very recently for AMD, I did a keynote, and it was posted virtually. So, you know, bringing a mosquito and showing it in front of a virtual audience probably is not going to help. So it was very much, it was done with music. So what we did is we had a dramatic music at the right time. When I introduced the product, that music just played and blasted off. And that created a little bit of a difference of hearing in audience, let's say, tone. And it set the tone because it was a build-up music going to that. And it could be as simple as that. You don't need mosquitoes to make a dramatic, let's say, moment.
Use a blanket then. Thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much.
No problem. So let me conclude, because I do have some book recommendations right at the end. So I think let me quick. I think we are almost out of time. So let me go back. So I would definitely thoroughly recommend you guys to use a variation of PAS or just even PAS in your slide, because that certainly helps. So your problem statement, your approach in the body, data very clearly highlighting the key part of that data, and that key takeaway or solution right at the end of the slide. And in terms of books which helped me, these were the 3 books. So Resonate is by Nancy Duarte. She talks a lot about using storytelling in slides. How do you use slides? How do you use in work presentation? That is probably the best book I've read, which combines storytelling with actually slides and also work-related presentation. This is all my personal opinion, so of course take it with a grain of salt. The best storytelling book I've read is Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. There's a few very close seconds, but this one talks a lot about story structure in a very structured approach. And he is a Moth Grand Slam winner. He's written quite a bit of novels as well. And this talks through how a nice format of telling story. Last but not least, for Toastmaster speeches and trying to put together in speeches where you don't have slides, Craig Valentine is one of my favorite world champion of public speaking. And this, I think, out of his 3 books is the best book he wrote, which incorporates a lot of storytelling elements. So these would be the 3 books. If I had to recommend in terms of storytelling, especially storytelling in a work setting, I would say to read. And last but not least, again, don't forget the past. Over to you, Toastmaster.
Thank you so much. I love you. I attended your workshop on table topics, and it was brilliant. So you could come back and do that workshop for this club, Mr. Nish.
Thank you, Nish. Thank you so much. This is really a very informative workshop. You just start with your experience from narrating to storytelling, and you tell us the elements of a story using your own story. When you was young, you with your father or family and ice cream, just very impressive. Then you used 3 examples to introduce the good story structure, the Steve Jobs presentation, and let me say, an inconvenient story, and then I have a dream speech, right? All of them are very vivid examples. Then when it comes to the anatomy of a slide, you just designed very interactive link to let us to be related to your introduction. When it comes to make it pop and slide story, you just answered so many questions patiently and generously. So I have to say, we all of us have learned a lot from your workshop. Let us thank Nish again.
Wow, we love you, Nish. We love you, sir. Come back.
Yeah, and guys, please don't forget to sign our guest book. You're welcome to come back. You're welcome to join us in more club events.
We also need Mr. Miller to come to this club and do his workshop. Mr. Miller, with humor.
I'm retired. I'm retired.
Oh, no. We protest. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We try to do one workshop every month. So next month we booked Gary McKinsey. I believe the workshop will be how to connect with your audience while live streaming. And you are also welcome to join our club meetings, which are held when we are not having workshops. Thank you, everyone. Yichong, do you have more to add?
Thank you, Yufan.
Yichong, we cannot hear you.
Thank you, Yufan. Thank you, Yikyon, Hari, Ruiz, everybody else in this club. Great stuff.
Yes.
Yeah,
Good job.
thank you everyone, and welcome to join our weekly meeting, which is also very interactive meeting. Yeah. We have a round robin to get the feedback from everyone for the speeches. And thank you again. Thank you very much, Nish. Yeah.
Thank you, Nish.
Thank you, Yikyo. Thank you, man.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Good night.
Thank you. Dennis will see